Okay, this presentation on the slave ship Wanderer is important for the many reasons that will be detailed in the story. However, it's important to understand that the slave trade was supported and financed in both northern and southern states. Hugh Thomas, author of The Slave Trade, the story of the Atlantic slave trade, 1440 to 1870, writes, "The British consul in New York reported that out of 170 slave trading expeditions fitted out in the 3 years preceding 1862, 74 were known or believed to have sailed from New York. As detailed by Edwin G. Burroughs and Mike Wallace in Gotham, A History of New York City to 1898, quote, from January of 1859 to August 1860, nearly 100 vessels left New York Harbor on slave trade business. Many had been built here. As shipwrights turned to the production of slavers, the profits could be enormous, 175,000 on a single voyage, as steamers could carry many more slaves than had the old sailing vessels," end quote. This happens in spite of the fact that in 1808, federal law prohibited the importation of slaves in the United States. And now, the story of the Wanderer. The story of the Wanderer, a perfectly constructed and luxuriously appointed 114-foot racing yacht, 26 and a half feet at her beam and with shallow draft of 9.5 feet, began here in East Setauket, Long Island, along the shore of Setauket Harbor. She was beautiful, sleek, and fast, beginning life as the queen of the New York Yacht Club. Marked by the cross on the picture and on the 1859 map of East Setauket is the birthplace of the Wanderer, Joseph Rowland's shipyard and his home. Joseph Rowland purchased this house and its adjoining shipyard from Nehemiah Hand, the area's first shipbuilder, in 1855. The schooner Wanderer was built as a yacht in Rowland's yard in 1857. The construction was supervised by Thomas B. Hawkins. The Wanderer was said to be the fastest schooner ever built. Joseph Rowland was just 40 years of age when he designed and built the Wanderer. Rowland had worked in shipyards since the age of 12 or 14. Excuse me. His brother was Captain Henry Luke Rowland, and many of his relatives in the Setauket and Long Island area were ship captains. Rowland learned every phase of shipbuilding, from the selection and use of woods and other materials to the design and construction of wooden sailing ships. Rowland put all of this expertise into the construction of first the Irene in 1852, and then his masterpiece, Wanderer. If this mural you see was the yard of shipbuilder Joseph Rowland, the man at the right overseeing the construction of every phase of the schooner yacht Wanderer would be Thomas B. Hawkins of Port Jefferson, an employee of the Wanderer's purchaser and owner, John D. Johnson. The New York Times, May 1857, reported, quote, "The Wanderer has long topmasts carrying large gaff topsails and a long flying jib boom. Her draft is 9.5 feet and her bow is concave after the George steers America. Her decks of narrow planks are so scrupulously white that one instinctively looks for a mat on which to wipe his feet on stepping over her rail. The sides of the gangway ladder are ornamented with brassworks representing harps. Portions of the steering apparatus are also made of the same material, the whole being kept perfectly bright. No expense has been spared to make the cabin and staterooms all that could be desired for comfort and luxury, end quote. Rowland's designs followed the important changes to the design of yachts by young boat designers such as George Steers, a Long Island and New York City youth who was recognized for his boat building skills at the young age of 16. Steers would go on to design many fast yachts, none as important as his famous 1851 yacht, America. You changed something for me, Barbara. None as famous as important as his famous 1851 yacht, America. Unfortunately, George Steer died in a carriage accident on his way to his summer home in Little Neck, Long Island on September 25th, 1856, just 9 months before the Wanderer made her debut as she slid into the waters of Setauket Harbor on June 17th, 1857. The racing yachts, America and Wanderer, were both equipped with sails from the R.H. Wilson Sail Company, Port Jefferson. The Wanderer was built for Colonel John D. Johnson, a Louisiana sugar baron, plantation owner, and wealthy member of the prestigious New York Yacht Club, who also owned a home in Islip, Long Island. Johnson paid $25,000 for Wanderer. His Louisiana connections were a fact that soon played into the Wanderer's change from a respectable and awe-inspiring racing yacht to an infamous slaver. Following the launch on June 17, with owner John D. Johnson and other members of the New York Yacht Club in attendance in East Setauket, the Wanderer headed down Long Island Sound to Manhattan, where thousands of people watched the sleek yacht as she made her way to the yacht club, where almost 1,000 people oohed and awed at her first public showing. On August 4th, the New York Yacht Club Yacht Squadron, including Wanderer, sailed to Newport for 3 days of showing off, entertaining, and visiting Newport and its mansions. The New York Times reported, quote, "and a splendid appearance they made at anchor in the harbor. Of course, there was no lack of visitors. The schooner Mystery and Wanderer were the favorites with the old salts here. I understand that 600 ladies and gentlemen visited the Wanderer," end of quote. 2 days later, Johnson and the squadron retraced their route back to New York, and Johnson prepared and provisioned for a southern tour that included Charleston, Savannah, Brunswick, Key West, Havana, and finally, New Orleans, Johnson's home and the location of his plantation. It seemed Johnson really wanted to show off his new toy, Wanderer. They sailed from New York in December 1857. The Wanderer arrived in Charleston, South Carolina, just 8 days after leaving New York. As reported by the New York Times, quote, "Our Charleston correspondent has seen the Wanderer come into Charleston. The welcome was tumultuous. Johnson entertained many prominent people aboard his yacht," end quote. From her construction to her destruction, the Wanderer was covered by the news media as if she was a modern rock star or Hollywood celebrity. Coverage that continued both on her way up to glorious achievement and then on her way down to the depths of public disgrace. Public disgrace that had its beginnings a few days later when Wanderer arrived in Savannah, Georgia, and Johnson, at one of the events honoring the Wanderer, met Charles Augustus Lafayette Lamar, a wealthy, influential citizen of Savannah. He was also described as sanguine, impetuous, choleric, and loud-spoken. And Charles Lamar did just that as a supporter of the Southern Radical Fire Eaters. This was a group that advocated for not only a return to the importation of slaves from Africa, but for the idea that slavery should be lauded, celebrated, and advocated as the best and most natural standard for the South. The Fire Eaters believed that they could and should ignore any federal or local law that was at odds with their sacred held beliefs. Lamar became more radicalized even as he increased his wealth. It soon became his goal not to wait for a change in the law to permit the importation of slaves from Africa, but to start the process himself. And he tried 3 times with 2 different ships, all of which made it to the west coast of Africa, but due to the nature of the people he dealt with, none of which returned with a single enslaved African. However, his next attempt would be with a northern-built racing yacht named Wanderer. Savannah, Georgia. Here was the hometown of Charles Lamar, and Wanderer was again the center of attention. By the time they left Savannah, Johnson had most likely already agreed to sell Wanderer to Lamar. Aboard the yacht, it was probably impossible to keep this information a secret. However, if the public knew that Lamar was the owner, authorities would be suspicious that the yacht was going to be used as a slaver. From the time the Wanderer left Setauket Harbor on June 17, 1857, the captain was 23-year-old Captain Walter Smith of Setauket. Smith sailed the Wanderer down Long Island Sound to New York Harbor, then to Newport, Rhode Island, then back to New York. And when Johnson and Wanderer left New York for the tour of the South, Smith was on board as captain for the days in Charleston and the next port of call, Savannah, Georgia. We don't know exactly when Smith left Wanderer, but he probably got the impression during their visit to Savannah that Johnson was making a deal with Charles Lamar and that the future use of the Wanderer was going to change. Regardless of why Captain Smith decided to leave Wanderer, he did so in January of 1858. In the possession of Captain Walter Smith's second great-grandson is this loving cup from the Wanderer's owner and guests. And the engraving on the cup says, "Presented to Captain Walter Smith of Yacht Wanderer on her southern cruise, January 1858. As a testimonial of our regard, by the Wanderers, John D. Johnson, Henry D. Townsend, G.W. McLean, T. E. Will Meading, E. A. Johnson, P. Hartshorn." After Savannah, Johnson and Wanderer, probably with Port Jefferson's Thomas B. Hawkins as captain, continued on to New Orleans, where they remained until March 31st, 1858. 12 days later, from New Orleans, they arrived back in New York, where Johnson introduced William C. Corey as the new owner of Wanderer and convinced the New York Yacht Club to make Corey, a wealthy and influential Southern gentleman, according to Johnson, a member of this exclusive yacht club. In New York, Corey discharged Wanderer's crew of Long Island men and brought in a crew of hard cases from New York's waterfront. 3 days after arriving in New York, Corey and Wanderer appeared in Port Jefferson, where large galvanized iron water tanks were installed, probably at the yard of J.J. Harris, and under the supervision of Captain Thomas B. Hawkins. With the installation of the water tanks and the appearance of the schooner Charter Oak outside the harbor with more supplies for Wanderer. Port Jefferson residents working around the harbor, began to have suspicions that she was being fitted out as a slaver. Curiosity was also in the mind of 13-year-old Frederick Mather Wilson, son of Port Jefferson sailmaker Reuben H. Wilson. Frederick and other local boys watched the progress of the work on the yacht Wanderer, and when the Charter Oak appeared in the harbor with a load of provisions for the Wanderer, Frederick rowed out to her. When he reached the schooner, the men on the Charter Oak, finding out who he was, asked him to get a needle and palm from his father so they could repair one of their sails. Frederick did so, and when back at the schooner, he was invited aboard. Looking around, Frederick went below, and the schooner men locked him in until that evening to keep him from telling anyone what he saw. They released him just as both Charter Oak and Wanderer left the harbor. In the meantime, surveyor of the port, S.S. Norton, had reported to the United States Marshal in New York that the Wanderer was being fitted out for the slave trade. The steam revenue cutter Harriet Lane, based at the battery, raced down the Sound, intercepted both schooners, and took them in tow into New York City over Corey's loud protests. In the 1850s, New York City was the center of slave trade activity in the United States. A modern study, American Slavers and the Federal Law, 1963, has identified 10 ships sold into the slave trade there in 1858 and 12 in 1859. Quote, slaving equipment was easily available. A number of merchants had grown wealthy, outfitting whalers and palm oil traders that were actually slave ships. The most important reason was the character of United States Judge Samuel R. Betts of the Southern District of New York, who consistently ruled there was no corroborating evidence of guilt, intention produced, despite the presence of large supplies of handcuffs, water, rice, messing and cooking utensils, and enough lumber to create a slave deck between decks. Corey knew this, and he was able, that was close quotes. Corey knew this, and he was able to smooth talk his way around any problems with the U.S. Marshals, and the case against the Wanderer was quietly dropped. When Wanderer left New York and headed for Charleston, South Carolina, she was fully stocked and equipped with almost everything needed to function as a slaver. Captain Hawkins had decided he wanted no further part in Corey's plans, and he left Wanderer in New York. On board by this time, or actually by the time Wanderer was detained, was another captain, J. Egbert Farnham, described as an adventurer of the most violent nature, who, in spite of being rough around the edges, so to speak, was invited along with Corey to many New York social gatherings, where he was introduced as the new captain of the Wanderer, and where he enthralled many, including the press, with his adventure stories and rough and ready charm. Wanderer arrived in Charleston on June 25th, 1858. Chandler Hugh Vincent added more slaving equipment, including 36 quart pans, 25 quart pans, 50 tin cups, wooden spoons, and another 12,000 gallons of water. Corey and Wanderer left Charleston on July 3rd and headed directly for Africa. They entered the Congo River on September 16, 1858, after 75 days at sea, with easterly winds slowing their progress. United States of America, Act of January 1st, 1808, an act to prohibit the importation of slaves into any port or place within the jurisdiction of the United States from and after the first day of January in the year of our Lord, 1808. United States of America, Act of May 15th, 1820. If any citizen of the United States, crew or ship's company, engaged in the slave trade, shall forcibly confine or detain any Negro or mulatto with intent to make such Negro or mulatto a slave, such citizen or person shall be adjudged a pirate, and on conviction shall suffer death. Unfortunately, the United States Africa Squadron was not up to the task of covering the extensive African coast, or even a small part of it. The U.S. Africa Squadron was the least well-equipped of all the U.S. squadrons around the world, and the crews assigned knew that this posting was the least desirable, as most all supplies, including food, could not be obtained locally. As a result, 2 out of every 3 slavers escaped both British and American patrols. Up the Congo, the British steamer of war Medusa was keeping an eye on 2 American slavers. When Wanderer arrived, Captain Farnham entertained the captain of the Medusa, who was not convinced Wanderer was not a slaver, but did not stop the yacht. Wanderer stayed on or around the Congo for a month and met with a number of African chieftains. Excuse me a second. The USS Vincennes was the least likely of all the U.S. African Squadron ships to capture the Wanderer. Between October 11th and 17th, Wanderer as she left the beach near the Congo River after loading aboard about 400 enslaved Africans. The Vincennes, with a speed of 8.5 knots, could not intercept the Wanderer, which was making a good 20 knots without even using her gaff topsails and flying jib. The Wanderer's voyage to the United States was unopposed from the time she outraced the Vincennes, as detailed in both the logbook of the Wanderer and the logbook of the Vincennes. The Vincennes was the oldest and slowest of Flag Officer Thomas Conover's 5-ship American African Squadron, and was commanded by Commander Benjamin Totten, his worst captain. The enslaved Africans would never again see the land of their birth. At least 80 died on the voyage across the Atlantic Ocean to America. Method of stowing Negroes in the 'tween decks of a slaver. Shackled foot to foot and hand to hand, it is no wonder that many of them died on the passage. The Wanderer arrived off the coast of Georgia just 6 weeks after leaving the African West Coast. Captain Corey went ashore on Little Cumberland Island and spoke to the lighthouse keeper, who arranged for a pilot to bring Wanderer into Jekyll Island. Once the enslaved Africans were on shore in the state of Georgia, on Jekyll Island, they were legal property and able to be sold. The pilot brought Wanderer from St. Andrews Sound up the creek at Jekyll Island, assisted by the yawl boat of John de Bignan, one of the owners of Jekyll Island. The Africans were unloaded, according to later testimony by the lighthouse keeper Horatio Harris, quote, Among the cargo were only a few grown men and women. Most were boys 12 to 18 years old. After disembarking, they squatted or laid around campfires, speaking an unintelligible tongue, end quote. The best estimate is that 409 enslaved Africans were landed at Jekyll Island from an original cargo of 490. Above is the cast iron sign, and to the right is the mess kettle, pictures that William B. Manus included as a part of his paper and slideshow on the Wanderer. Both existed on Jekyll Island in the 1970s and have since disappeared. This mess kettle from the slave wanderer, quote, this mess kettle from the slave wanderer was used for feeding the slaves landed on Jekyll Island in 1858. The Wanderer was used in the illicit slave trade by W.C. Corey of Charleston and his associates Charles A.L. Lamar of Savannah and Nelson C. Trowbridge of New Orleans. Most of the Africans suffered from diarrhea, dietary deficiencies, and skin diseases. They were sick, tired, and needed rest, care, and good food to recover. But, quote, the Negroes had to be dispersed as soon as possible, end quote. A camp was set up by Dr. Robert Hazelhurst, who was married to the sister of John and Henry de Bignon. He checked every African and, his quote, none died in his care. Many enslaved Africans from the Wanderer remained in the coastal areas of South Carolina and Georgia, with a number being sold to plantations and individuals around Brunswick, Georgia, and Jekyll Island. From December 1858 until the start of the Civil War, newspapers followed the destinies of some Wanderer enslaved Africans who were discovered in all the states of the Lower South. Partly as a result of the Wanderer landing on Jekyll Island, the Buchanan administration, 1857 to 1861, strengthened the African squadron by adding steamers of war and by permitting closer cooperation with the British. Wanderer went from a slaver in 1858 to a U.S. Navy schooner during the Civil War. She had service as a water carrier due to her many water tanks, which made it possible for converted steamers to remain on station. She was also a dispatch vessel, blockading vessel, and gunboat, and she is credited with the capture of 3 sloops. Wanderer was sold and resold a number of times after the war. In 1869, she was registered for the West Indian fruit trade. On January 21st, 1871, she was listed as a total loss on Cape Macy, Cuba. The history of the East Setauket yacht Wanderer tells the story of the people who created, crewed, and sailed her. Unfortunately, the story of the enslaved Africans who were her cargo is less well known. Of the hundreds of Africans who were landed on Jekyll Island in November 1858, we know the names of only a few, the stories of even less, and the images of none. We only recognize dimly their suffering and the historical damage done both to ourselves and to their descendants. Author Eric Colonius, who wrote the 2006 book, The Wanderer, The Last American Slave Ship, and the Conspiracy That Set Its Sails, tells the story of Seleucine, who suffered but survived the voyage to Jekyll Island, survived the Civil War, and became to many people a man named Ward Lee, and told his story in 1908 to an anthropologist from the University of Chicago. Seleucine married and had 4 children, dreamed of returning to Africa, and passed 10 years later without fulfilling his dream. His sons moved north. Grandson William moved to Brooklyn. In the 1980s, his great-great-granddaughters were named the Double Mint Gum Twins. Today, the family includes teachers, lawyers, and guidance professionals. Margaret Higgins, the great-granddaughter of Seleucine, lives in Nassau County, Long Island, and her grandson is named Alexander Seleucine Valenti. The National Freedom Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, states that upward of 27 million people are currently enslaved around the world, more than at any time in human history. The National Freedom Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, is also called the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. Much of my story came from these 4 sources: William B. Manus, Shipbuilding in the Setaukets; Winfield M. Thompson, Historic American Yachts, The Slave Ship Wanderer; The Rudder Magazine, 3 parts, Boston, 1904; Tom Henderson Wells, The Slave Ship Wanderer; Eric Colonius, The Wanderer, The Last American Slave Ship, and the Conspiracy That Set Its Sails. Thank you. Let me see if I can get rid of this now.
Thanks so much for that, Bev. That was a truly fascinating story and such an important part of our history. Thank you for sharing it with us. It's a story that deserves to be told over and over again. So we're going to sign you up for some more lectures, Bev. I just want to remind everyone, you're still on mute. Just stay that way. If you have any questions or comments, just click on the chat button that you'll find on the bottom or on the side of your screen. Bev, we do have a couple of questions lined up for you already.
Go right ahead.
All right. So first question is from Kamal Siddiqui. Kamal wants to thank you for this presentation and asks if the original architectural drawing used to build the Wanderer, is it available in the archives?
No, it's available in the Smithsonian Institution. They have the original, or I think it's the National Archives, I believe.
Okay.
Oh, and the half-hull model is at the Port Jefferson Historical Society, and a full half-hull model with sails is at Mystic Seaport.
Great. Okay. Kamal also asked another question asking if you are aware of any Wanderer descendant communities that exist today or any families.
I was at one point, about 20 years ago, there was a Wanderer Society that came out to Port Jefferson, and a number of local historians, including myself, talked to them and gave them information. And they toured the area. But I don't know that they are still active. I looked for them on the internet, but I couldn't find them. I do know the name and address of the woman, but I really can't give it out, the great-great-granddaughter who named her grandson.
Well, Bev, perhaps we can help you do a little bit of research there also.
Sure.
All right.
Always looking for more information.
We have a question from Sandy Brewster Walker asking what company fitted the Wanderer out as a slaver or for slave trade?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. I don't know. I haven't gone into New York City to check on that. It would probably be in some of the archives, possibly South Street Seaport would have some of that information, but I have not followed up on that. Sorry.
Sandy White wants to know what the photo is behind you in your background there.
Oh, I spent a week on the Picton Castle, a 150-foot bark out of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. And this is one of the pictures that I took in the Gulf of Mexico when we were accompanied by other sailing ships heading into Florida, our port of call.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Someone named Two White Dogs would like to, asking if you could repeat the names of those on the Walter Smith Loving Cup.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can find that. Okay.
They're interested in those who were on the Wanderer with John D. Johnson.
Yeah, that's no problem. Okay. In addition to John D. Johnson, there was Henry D. Townsend, Towsend, G.W. McLean, McLean, T.E. Wilmington, have a terrible time with that one, Wilmeiding, that's Wilmeiding. The next is E.A. Johnson. I think he's a brother of John. And P. Hartshorne, Hartshone.
Thank you for that, Bev.
Sure.
Claire Bellajou would like, wants to know if you could, hi Claire. She wants to know if you could speak to the enslaved population in Setauket prior to 1827.
Yes and no. I've never done the kind of work that the Preservation of Long Island has done. And I've read, what's her name? I read her book years ago. But I do know that, for instance, that the Smiths, Tangier Smith, had 19 slaves in his inventory, whether they were all in Setauket or divided between Setauket and their estate in Mastic, I don't know. I do know that Anna Smith Strong still had slaves at the time she was working as a spy for the Culper spy ring. And I do know that there were a number of other people that had them. I don't know of any numbers. I can't give you any facts on that. We just have to go by like the Thompson Diary, which has his slaves being passed down to his children, except for one slave who he said should not be sold. That was a slave named Sharper. But we don't know what happened to Sharper.
Sharper shows up in a later census working for somebody else.
Yeah, he shows up in a later census working for somebody else. But anyway, that's the best I can do for you at this point.
Thank you.
I'm trying to think of the name of Preservation of Long Island author. She, my mind goes blank. But her book on slavery on Long Island is excellent if you haven't read it. Sandy, I mean Marty.
Okay, we have a couple more questions lined up for you. Catherine Kirkpatrick asks, what relation was Captain Thomas Hawkins to the Jonas Hawkins family of the Hawkins Mount House?
Ah,
I
Oh.
just looked at that the other day.
we just, hang on a second, we'll have it for
wait a
you.
minute, let me
We have
look at-
Barbara in the background looking it up.
And let's go on with the next question.
All right, so the next question we have from Tiana Avery asks, was Lamar the only owner to use the Wanderer as a slave ship?
Yes and no. There's a whole history of the Wanderer after when a new captain came on board and actually stole the Wanderer and went over to Africa to pick up a new load of slaves. But he was so inept that the crew mutinied against him, and the ship ended up being sailed back into the local area. I believe New York, I'm not sure, I'd have to check it again. But that's a whole nother story. The ineptness of that next captain who wanted to use it as a slaver, but never did, makes an interesting story in itself.
Another question from Two White Dogs. She asks, or they ask, do you think Johnson built the Wanderer with the intention of selling her as a slaver, or was he convinced to do so as an afterthought?
Well, two things. Number one, he was a plantation owner. He was a slave owner. So it's hard to say what was in his mind, but I'll tell you another thing. He built the Wanderer to win. He was a member of the New York Yacht Club, and he liked winning. And he built the Wanderer, which was larger than any of the other racing ships owned by other people in the New York Yacht Club. And he started racing her almost immediately, and he won every race. And because the New York Yacht Club also had to deal with its own members, it said he couldn't race anymore. And I think that kind of ticked him off. And after that, he went south, and the rest is history.
The rest is history.
Did you find it?
Another question here from Kamal. Kamal asks if you're familiar with Jim Jordan's book, The Slave Trader's Letter Book, Charles Lamar, The Wanderer, and Other Tales of the African Slave Trade. If so, what are your thoughts about that book?
No, I am not familiar with that particular book. There are 3 or 4 other books, 2 of which I own, that are, I haven't got the titles right here, but no, I don't have that one. Hang on to that information.
I have it, yeah.
And I'll look it up, and I'd love to read it.
Claire just wanted to let us know that the spy Robert Townsend's uncle, Captain Robert Stoddard of Newport, Rhode Island, was a slave ship owner and captain in the 1750s and 60s.
The interesting thing about Rhode Island is that 90% of all the ships that brought slaves from Africa to the east coast of the United States came out of Rhode Island. 90%.
Wow.
And many of the captains also came from Rhode Island. And many of the well-known families, important families of Rhode Island, were slave ship, made their money by the importation and use of slaves.
Catherine Kirkpatrick just wanted to offer the book you mean could be Discovering the African American Experience in Suffolk County by Grania Bolton Marcus.
That's it. That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
There you go.
I couldn't remember Granny's name, but I didn't.
They are Thomas and Jonas are first cousins twice removed.
Thomas and Jonas are first cousins twice removed.
Well, there you go.
And you can probably find their relationship in the Hawkins genealogy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're both in the Hawkins genealogy.
They're both in the Hawkins genealogy.
Number 57 and number 685.
Number 57
And number 685.
and number 685. Number 57.
Thank you, Barbara. Kamal has another question. Are you aware of any attempts to locate the wreckage of the Wanderer?
No, I'm not. That's interesting. It's certainly other ships have been found. One of the most recent that was found a few years ago was Blackbeard's ship that was discovered, the pirate Blackbeard. So I don't know, maybe somebody will go down to off Cape Macy, Cuba. If you can actually get to that area. I don't know how much, how dangerous it would be to go down to Cuba in that particular location and what the Cubans would say about it. Any others?
Did you lose him?
We lose you? I lost you.
Put it in the chat. Did your sound go off somehow?
My sound was off. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can now.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I have a snoring dog in the background that I didn't want anyone to be distracted by.
Well, at least you can't ask questions.
Right. Catherine Kirkpatrick asks, if you have time, can you tell us more about Silas Tobias Brewster Farm Diary?
Oh,
Silas Tobias Brewster's.
that's the thing in the box over there.
Oh,
We've been
okay.
researching.
You read my article? Did she read my article?
He must have. I think she's nodding yes.
Well, it's interesting because the property that he
He
was,
ended up working for Walter Smith.
huh?
He ended up working.
Yeah, he ended up working for Walter Smith, the same guy we're talking about that was the captain of the Wanderer. And he had he was living there in Oldfield. The great grandson still lives there, and he's the one that has the loving cup. But the building that Tobias lived in down by the water, according to the Smiths' descendants, is the same building that's down below them on Conscience Bay right now, but it's been completely redone and is now a private home, not owned by the Smiths because that section of the property was sold. And we're pretty sure that the wife was a Tobias, although we can't prove it, because the Tobias family also lived right close by.
And it wasn't Silas Tobias that lived there, it was just Silas's father.
That's right, it was Silas.
Tobias went to
I'm sorry, it was Silas Tobias's father that lived there in that area. And the journal, which was written by Smith,
Daybook.
it's a day book, is very interesting because he puts in a record everything that his slave did on his property.
I'm not sure he was a slave.
No, I'm sorry, he wasn't a slave.
He wasn't a slave.
Now we're getting into slave and non-slave and stuff like that. Okay. So there's a lot more information, and I'm supposed to be copying the pages, digitizing it. I haven't gotten to it yet.
The son went to Connecticut.
That's right.
The son went to Connecticut, and it said in his wife's obituary that she actually worked for a while for P.T. Barnum.
And that's going to be another one of my articles on the son and his wife. that we know more about him than we do about his father because he was in the military. And so there's lots of records of him there. And of course, there's the letter about his wife who died at the age of what, 105?
Something like that.
Yeah, about 105. So we have more information. And I still have to do more research on that, but that's going to be one of my future articles. It's going to be on Silas Tobias and his wife and their life, as much as we can tell. A lot we can't tell.
Thank you for that. I think that's a great spot for us to wrap things up. Thank you again, Bev. Tomorrow, I will send out an email to all the participants that were here tonight with a link. If in case you missed part of the video, we recorded it and we'll put it up again and you can watch it. Bev, is it okay if we share any of your contact information if anyone has any further questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'll send that out in the email that you'll all receive tomorrow morning as well. And I just want to remind everyone, we have another lecture coming up Monday, September 14th with our very own Bev Tyler once again. And that one is called Eel Catching in Setauket, the African American Christian Avenue Community. So in that same email, I'll send a link with a pre-registration link for you to sign up for that one as well. Thank you all again for supporting the Historical Society and for participating in these Zoom lectures. They're turning out to be a lot of fun. So thank you. And thank you, Bev. Thank you, Barbara. And good night, all.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you. Thank you all for being there.
Good night.